Oh, the damage has been extensive, and it's been extensive in a number of ways. When you tell the Russians, for example, that you're collecting their diplomatic communications, an operation like that can take 8 or 10 years to put in place and can be shut down in 20 minutes. We've been told by Snowden, everybody, the world's been told how exactly we get into some of these networks, and that means those entry points are shut down. These are important. I'm not talking now about European targets. I'm talking about Russian, Iranian, North Korean, and Chinese targets. These have nothing at all to do with the civil liberties of Americans or Europeans. And those have been, we've seen our collection against terrorist networks, for example, fall off sharply. Snowden has undoubtedly created a discussion about collection of metadata domestically that I welcome. I thought it should have happened at the government's instance some years ago. But it's important to understand he's done much, much more than that. And no friend of liberal democracies can be in favor of the disclosures he's made relating to our foreign intelligence. What he said yesterday, by the way, Gordon, that about collecting industrial espionage was absolute nonsense, and not the first time he's said things that have just been wild.
Right, let me just interrupt you and pick you up on one thing that you said there, that you said you thought the debate on metadata should have happened years ago. Did we know about metadata years ago? Isn't it only as a result of Edward Snowden that we've suddenly been made aware of this?
Well, that's the point that I'm making, Gordon. I believe that in a democracy where you have, and we tolerate and need powerful secret organizations, the only way that democracies can tolerate that is if the general rules under which they operate are well understood and if they are policed and followed. I believe collecting all the metadata in the United States was a watershed event and should have been made public by the government.
Okay, let me bring in the real Gordon, who's been listening to all of that. Gordon Carrera, let me come to you. Could the NSA have handled things better / differently?
Well, I think these organisations, NSA and the UK GCHQ, have existed on secrecy, and they have tried to maximise their capability historically and to try and be able to do as much as they could, and therefore they've argued that secrecy has been important to do that. But I think the issue now is public consent, and how much public consent and knowledge you need for the public to inform their decisions about how far these organisations should go, particularly as they've moved more into the domestic space, or where, if you like, domestic and international overlap, looking for potential terrorist suspects in the UK or the US, involves looking at, in communications, looking at general communications rather than, if you like, just the internal communications of Russia and China. This is a different mission, if you like, from what they used to undertake in the Cold War. And I think one of the problems for them is that they have remained in their kind of secret posture that they had during the Cold War era. And there was never really a public debate about what they could do, what they should do, and what kind of oversight mechanisms there should be. And so suddenly these Edward Snowden revelations came as a shock to people. They suddenly went, whoa, I didn't realise they could do this, or they were doing this. And I think that's created a huge problem for these organisations.
But I guess you can't. Can you do kind of intelligence by plebiscite? Let's ask the people what's acceptable. Can we spy on this one or that one?
Hold on. I do want to say that as somebody who considers themselves a friend of the idea of a liberal democracy, it is possible to think that these revelations are helpful. And I think what we have here is we have kind of a Cold Warrior mentality that has forgotten or not noticed that the same infrastructure that became the ability for China and Russia to communicate with diplomatically is now the same infrastructure that we use for our medical records, for our phone calls, for our lives, and to keep our hospitals and our trains going. And when they weaken this infrastructure, they weaken it, yes, for Russian diplomats and Chinese hackers, but they also weaken it for you and me and everyone that rides a train or needs things that come from a factory or wants to make a phone call or have a private message with their sweetie.
And you, as well, have found yourself being questioned and had your computers taken away.
I was part of a case where I haven't had my computer taken away. I have been questioned, but that's not totally. It was part of a criminal investigation, and it's not totally germane to the kind of mass surveillance issues that we're dealing with right now. But I really, really want to make a point because I think people don't understand this, and it hasn't been talked about. It certainly hasn't been talked about by the government. But there's a system of where the really, really weird technical stuff that's hard for people to get is this weakening encryption standards. And and what they call O days in the industry, which is vulnerabilities in computer systems. And what the Snowden revelations have shown is that, and what the review group actually highlighted is that these tools have become tools of surveillance. But by keeping those as tools of surveillance, we surrender them as tools of defense, which means the whole world is made more vulnerable by what we need to do. The whole infrastructure is made more vulnerable by what we need to do for our spying capabilities.
Jill Brennan, let me just come back to you and ask you, excuse me, a kind of almost a futurology question. How different do you think the NSA is going to be as a result of Snowden, and do you think it will be for the better?
NSA's capabilities are now well known, and that is to some degree for the better in terms of domestic data collection, and some degree much for the worse in terms of the disclosure of its overseas capabilities. The zero-day problem is much more difficult than what I've just heard explained. It is a hard problem. There is, in all the intelligence agencies, a tension between doing offense better and doing defense better. There's no question that balance has shifted dramatically toward defense in the last 5 or 6 years. But unless you think that 0 days are finite, that there's a finite number of them, and unless they can all be bought up, then all we can do is to continue to shift the balance toward defense, but there will be no finishing of 0 days. 0 days mean vulnerabilities in the way software is written. That problem isn't going to go away. It's not as if we can suddenly say we're never going to use any of them anymore. And even the review group understood that. So the question is, how do we balance this better?